good to be together. And I thank the holy, interdependent web of all existence. I thank that web for this church, for this sanctuary where our fears and devastation, where my fears and devastation can be held sacred. May our presence with each other heal the suffering in our spirits. Whether you are here for the first time, whether you're returning after a time away, whether you are a regular and know deep within how this congregation moves you toward healing and wholeness, you are welcome, and we are blessed by the presence of each of you. Friends, this is not the service I intended, not the service I imagined when I was busy planning a month ago, weeks ago, even days ago. Today we join to celebrate the history of this congregation, and I imagined a jubilee, pure and simple. Laughter, music, singing and sharing, eating and challenging each other's memories of what has happened along the way at this church. And all that jubilation would be sitting up inside the joy of a Democrat continuing in the White House. The election of the first woman to serve this country as president. I confess, I just expected it to go that way. And in all the glory, I wanted to remind us that we have a lot of work to do to meet the other side, to work to understand them and their needs that this country just didn't seem to be filling. My, how the tables have turned on me, perhaps on some of you too. Yes, I too am living in a state characterized by shock and disbelief. And I need some solace, I need some comfort, and I imagine that one way or another you do too. Because no matter how you voted, some of your compadres here in this sanctuary are just as shocked and disbelieving, just as hurt and in need of comfort as I am. And so I offer this morning a source of strength and solace for me from our great hymnal. You don't have to move. This is Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and where the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. So here we are, friends, in this holy place, where we're blessed with love and amazing grace, where we can trust each other's wisdom, tell our stories, share the silence as we seek the God of our own understanding, as we share a faith that leaves us free to be together and yet different in fundamental ways. Blessed be for this church and for this religious movement of which this church is a part. Later today, this room, now a sanctuary and always holy, will be transformed. It will, through swift and planful hands, become a dining hall and a meeting room, a performance space and an interview booth. And in this room that is always made holy by the people gathered in it, you will share stories of how this congregation came to be and how it has become what it is today. Now, I have been with you for a little over 3 months now, and we are getting to know each other. You are indulging me in my storytelling tendencies, and I am finding ways to serve, to be part of this congregation. And you all make lots of room for me to do that, to fit in. and I really appreciate it more than I can say. Do you know how really important are those acts of hospitality, those welcoming gestures? Those gestures, certainly the ones of enfolding embrace, those are so needed and so obvious, so easy to read and understand. But even as you move to embrace, do you see how you hold yourself back a little bit, ever so slightly, to make room for a stranger? The word welcome derives from the Old English willkommen, where will means desire and komma means guest. Willkommen, desired guest. Welcome. Welcome literally means to desire to bring into company someone who is a guest, not yet part of the body, but wanted all the same. And you here are all welcoming to the guest, listening with all your heart to the needs brought forward, holding out a hand, not rushing to grasp, but making space for the newcomer to put herself forward just a little, confident that there will be room for her at the table too. That gift of welcoming is truly a blessing that can be given, and it is one that can be received as well. The warmth of this space and this company. We can anticipate the stories we will share together in a very little while. Stories that make up the short but deep and meaningful history of this church. You will tell those stories better than I can. So I very much look forward to that time today. Native writer Thomas King tells us in his book, The Truth About Stories, do you know this book? That's all we are. All we are is stories, he says. And he's talking certainly of Native people, of the Okanagan and the Anishinaabe, that's not how you say it, and the Métis, and the Laguna, and the Cherokee people. The very people whose oral stories we often use here and now, that have folksy wisdom and moral lessons for our children, even as those Native people's cultures and languages are disappearing through neglect and purposeful destruction. The truth about stories, Thomas King says, is that that's all we are. King is a Native writer, yes. He is also a professor of English at the University of Guelph. His little book is composed of contemporary Native stories, personal stories, and it is also composed of endnotes and a bibliography. That's sometimes annoying and disruptive hallmark of the very learned, right? Maybe a little overeducated. I understand that ilk. I am a full-fledged member. King, the Native writer, and King, the English professor, are one and the same person, of course. And as King, the writer, weaves those stories of Native people and their history, King, the professor, is showing us how these stories of Native people are inextricably bound up with the stories of white people. There's no way around that. If stories are all that Native people are, the same can be said for white people. The truth about stories is that's all we are. That's all any of us are. I find this an extraordinarily compelling sentiment, probably because I like to tell stories. I don't think, though, that being constituted as a story makes us any less embodied or substantial. On the contrary, the stories we tell about ourselves, the stories that are told about us, these stories directly construct and influence how our bodies inhabit actual physical space. So I'm going to tell a story now. You'll know right away it's a made-up one for a change. Imagine that I am wheelchair bound. I am able to work the muscles in my arms through weight training and I am become strong to move myself through resisted space, pushing wheels with my arms rather than striding on my two legs. I have special gloves to protect the tender skin of my palms. I have a chair constructed of high-tech materials, strong and durable but lightweight. I am mobile. I am tough. I am independent. I am differently able. That's my story. Now imagine I wheel myself out my front door, down a ramp and onto the city sidewalk, making my way to the public library, of course. Up ahead, I see a traffic light and a crossing to get to my destination on the other side. But when I arrive at the corner, there are no cuts in the sidewalk. No way for me to get down with my chair self off that high sidewalk and into the street. I am stranded. I am weak. I am helpless. I am disabled. That is also my story. Both stories, both of them, are inevitably connected to my body. The truth about stories is that's all they are. They're not airy flights of fancy. No. Stories, how we live in and through them, they are real and they have very real consequences. Here in the aftermath of the election, we may be feeling that our story has taken an unpleasant and frightening turn. We may feel that we are not even in the story we thought we were in. In his pastoral message, UUA President Peter Morales calls us, quote, "for now, to reflect and draw strength from one another. Together we can recover. Together we can shape the future." President Morales calls us to fellowship, to healing, so that we can make a new story. One that addresses the fear, the misogyny, the racism and injustice acted out upon particular bodies. Those stories we dread will take over our future. I think it's important to recall that Unitarian Universalism, as a liberal and progressive religion, has always sought to counter stories of hate and fear with a story of love and hope. In their book, A House of Hope, John Burns and Rebecca Parker, do you know that book? They remind us that, quote, liberals offered soul-stirring and life-giving alternative theological affirmations in place of the stances and pieties they rejected. And what stories, what theologies were our forefathers and our foremothers rejecting and writing in there? They rejected literal understandings of the Hebrew and Christian scriptures as incompatible with science, history, reason, and ethical sensibilities. They critiqued views of a divine being who sanctioned unjust acts, such as a white man in the clouds who defined women as inherently inferior, or black and brown people as outside of humanity and destined for enslavement and destruction. They rejected deity as controlling and wrathful, demanding obedience and threatening eternal torment for human curiosity and seeking. They questioned the notion that Christianity was the one and only true religion. Through all these old stories ran the notion that humans were always dirty, warring children, unable to rise above a base materiality, never able to be trusted to be good, perpetually deserving of punishment. Those old stories do not and do not serve. They do not provide hope in a world ever changing. And what new stories did our foremothers and our forefathers embrace tell and retell as to spread a religion of hope and love across the nation and across the world. They placed religion on a new foundation: reason, experience, and ethical insight. They felt a loving God would save all God's people, condemning none to eternal hellfire. That's the original meaning of Universalist. They found religious insight and spirituality in the beliefs and practices at the intersection of many religions: Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism, as well as Judaism and Christianity, the most obvious ones. They relished the direct experience of the divine through nature and the physical reality of which we are an integral part. Through all these strands ran the notion that humans could always become better, more kind, more justice-seeking, more focused on welcome, more loving, more whole. And this new story of hope and love, where humanity is good and loving, this story has always, from the beginning, been woven into social concerns and political action. It was Unitarian Universalism at the forefront of efforts to redress the wrongs of slavery and to establish the rights of women. It was the Christian social gospel of reform and improvement, supported by Unitarian Universalists, that influenced President Roosevelt's New Deal. Unitarian Universalists helped to rescue children from the Nazis. Unitarian Universalists joined other people of faith to march and to die for civil rights. And Unitarian Universalists have long given support for peacemaking, for LGBTQ rights, for environmental stewardship, and for women's equality. That is a story of love and hope, and that is our story. We here now in this church, that is the story that makes us who we are. Our little church here on a rural back road in Canandaigua, we are part of this larger movement. The story of the founding and the continuing of this church is woven into the larger story of a faith tradition. We here stand in the ranks together with all those who have come before us, and those who now labor with us for love and hope, for justice and peace. Burns and Parker remind us that hope began before we were born. It began with generations of people who lived before us and who devoted their lives to what they hoped for their children and their grandchildren. We understand that story and our part in it. These hopeful people working their way toward the world they desired, writing a story that we continue to write today and can write tomorrow. These people we can claim as our ancestors. These hopeful people can serve as spiritual guides and inspiration for the work of building, of story writing, to which we as people of faith must turn again and again. President Morales commiserates with us as we find ourselves surrounded by fear. Not only our own fear, but the fear that led to the current election. He reminds us that fear almost always comes in disguise, so we don't recognize it for what it is. Fear comes marked as hate, racism, homophobia, misogyny, religious intolerance, and even ignorance. He reminds us that as much as we might like to, we can't effectively use facts and reason to convince a person with such fears that they are unfounded, because those fears are not rational. Rather, they're a gut feeling. They're in the body. And in his words, trying to reason someone out of that sort of fear is like telling a clinically depressed person to cheer up. He's a pretty smart guy. Rather than ranting, rather than lamenting, even though we need a little time for that, President Morales encourages us to really listen with an open heart and an open mind. As a religious people who affirm the power of love, we need to hear the cries, however strident, of the fears that surround us. So what is the new story we will write? The story that builds on the story that came before? How can the power of that long history of love and hope behind us help to sustain us in this painful time? When things seem so bleak and so hopeless in spite of what we want? I'm going to quote him again. He acknowledges and calls us all to acknowledge that we are emotionally exhausted and deeply offended by what we have experienced. This is a time to take a deep breath and a long view. As Rick reminded us earlier, our role as religious progressives committed to democracy, compassion, and human dignity is to help bend our culture toward justice. Think of issues like marriage equality and civil rights. The laws change when attitudes change. Our role is to help change attitudes, to lead by example. Our voice is going to matter in the coming years. Our role, as always, will be to be a powerful voice for compassion and civil rights. Yes, we are hurting, we are angry, we are saddened, we are confused. And yes, we live out a glorious story of hope and love. Our little country church is part of a larger history, a larger story from which we can gain strength today and in all the weeks and works ahead of us. We are broken, a little cracked and wounded, but that's how the light gets in. You remember the kintsugi from a few weeks ago. That's how we open ourselves, how we really listen to the needs of others and the needs of the world. We're a little broken, but that's where the light comes in. And we listen as guests and companions, ever welcome to each other, open to each other's pain, and open to each other's story. Let us promise each other to tend to our little boat home, to that wide earth, and to our little country church. Let us promise each other to maintain relationship with each other and with all people of our world, striving together for justice in love and in hope. Yes, friends, let us promise all of this today and every day, and you remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are welcome, and you are needed. May you feel it so.
David played to please the Lord, but you don't really care. a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.